It's my pleasure to introduce Elvir Causevic, good, who asked that I add to his extensive bio on this by pointing out that he was a scientist once, got to know Larry doing EEG omics, which I'm told is not pronounced egomics, and is now in the IP world, and will talk to us about that.
All right, so shifting gears a bit today. So we heard about all kinds of pathologies and molecules. Now the real pathology, intellectual property. So I'll talk to you about some ideas that Larry and I have been bouncing around for a number of years. Basically, how to replace the 150 million Wallenberg money when it runs out. How can we be smart about funding the exciting things that you're doing and I used to be doing? How can we be smart about just basically covering at least the cost of payroll, right? All the stuff that we've talked about. It's a lot of really smart folks working with million-dollar pieces of equipment. Is there a better way than go beg some bureaucrats in the government or beg some, second, third, fourth generation Wallenbergs to throw a couple of dollars our way? Can we be self-sustaining in a way where we participate in the market economy more powerfully and get the real value of what we're working on? That's how I ended up in intellectual property, and this will be the basic topic. Keep that in mind. The basic point I'm trying to figure out is, what do we need to learn as a group? What skill do we need to have to figure out how to get more value and more freedom to operate in a financial way from the work that we're already producing and already doing? That's the idea. How do we be smart? So what's big? What happened in the intellectual property world? How many of you follow intellectual property? Okay, that's pretty good. Any lawyers in the room? Come on, don't be shy. I apologize in advance for all the insults and jokes and all of that, but I'll do my best. So American Invents Act is a new law that Congress passed last year. Lots of lobbying back and forth. It was supposed to change a whole lot of things. It didn't. It changed a couple of things. One of the things it changed is the first to file, which means that if you work in a collaboration with a partner, their partner can run to the patent office and file your stuff together as his stuff, and you'll have a tough time showing otherwise. Because the law changed, you used to be the first to invent. So if you had a good record that you invented something, then you could go and prove that you're the first to invent, regardless of who ran to the patent office first. Now, it's who's going to run to the patent office first, among other things. There's a huge company called Nortel. They used to make telephone equipment and wireless telephones. They went bankrupt. They were going to shut them down. Some IP counsel inside Nortel kept saying, wait, we have these valuable patents. Google came and offered $900 million for those patents. And then Microsoft, Ericsson, Sony, and Apple came in and bought them for $4.5 billion for a handful of patents. It's pretty serious stuff. ICANN, an activist shareholder investor, came into Motorola, another telephone company, and said, wait a minute, you guys are not doing a good job. He forced them to go sell some patents. They split the company into Motorola Solutions and Motorola Mobility. Google, because they got left out of the Nortel party, bought Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion for a handful of patents. Microsoft most recently acquired some patents from AOL, in a really weird twist. Remember the old Microsoft Netscape browser wars years ago, when Netscape was a really cool thing and Microsoft kept stealing stuff? Well, AOL bought Netscape and their patents, and now in the ironic twist of the century, Microsoft buys those Netscape patents and that Netscape business from AOL and pays a measly $1 billion for 800 patents. Of course, Microsoft being who they are, the innovator, they turn around and resell those patents right away to Facebook for $550 million. And you heard of Facebook. Lots of huge decisions that came down in the last couple of years, federal and Supreme Court. Prometheus, anybody know about Prometheus? What happened? Yeah, what's the big deal? It may or may not, right? We'll see what the other courts do. Supreme Court knows nothing about patents, right? And all of them know nothing about patents because they voted 9-0. And if you really follow patents and you look at all the federal courts and the circuit courts and everybody else who really knows about patents, then you say, what are you thinking? Well, the same thing they were thinking when they gave us a couple of presidents ago. So Prometheus basically said, you measure concentration of a drug You measure concentration of blood, you decide how much drug to give, and then you just give that much drug. And Mayo came around and said, wait, they came with another patent that changed the numbers a little bit, and they argued about patents, and it ended up all the way at the Supreme Court. Supreme Court basically decided that the original Prometheus patent is basically non-patentable subject matter, right? You can't take a law of nature and patent it, and they didn't give out any rule to say what can you patent. So this challenges a few things in the patent world. We see a lot of IP-based shareholder activist actions. That's a mouthful. What it means is that there are folks out in the market who know patents well and who have capital, and they're going into companies and saying, you're not returning money to your shareholders, you're not leveraging your IP assets, you're a bad CEO, we're going to fire you, and then they make these transactions happen. And turns out they are right. So here's a picture, because everybody had these fancy graphs with arrows going everywhere and lots of things. Clearly pathological. So here's all of your cell phones, iPhones, everything else. Here's who's soon who on smartphones. It's a simple chart of just a large lawsuit. There's lots of other stuff that goes on there. It came out of a blog called Tech Dirt. And lots of really great graphs, but that's old news, right? That's telecom, cell phones, all of that stuff. 250,000 patents owned by all of these companies, and everybody's on everybody's case. So what's happening now? So there's a little company called Microsoft. In 1990, they had 1.2 billion in revenue, and they had 5 patents. In 2012, 70 billion in revenue, huge market cap, 13,000 patents, possibly up to 75,000 rights to patents, right, through licenses and agreements and joint ventures and so on and so forth. Major monstrosity on that. They have a friend in the industry they've been working with for many years called Yahoo. You heard of Yahoo? At one point, Microsoft offered Yahoo $44 billion to buy them. The CEO at the time, who is now gone, rightly so, said, $44 billion? For what? A search engine? No. So today, Yahoo is worth $18 billion. So because Yahoo is not doing so well, what's the first thing you do when you can't do well? Well, you fire the CEO, and then the new CEO comes in and does what? Sue, right? Who are you going to sue? There's 10 really good patents, and in March, they decide to sue who? Facebook. Right? But wait, there's more. Facebook goes to IBM right then and buys 750 patents from IBM so that Facebook can do what? Sue Yahoo on one patent on this. But then what happens? The shareholder activist shows up at a whole another company called what? AOL, right? We all know AOL. AOL decides to sell their patents, like I showed you on the first slide, to Microsoft. Oops, sorry, this jumped ahead. To Microsoft for $1 billion. Microsoft now has 2 friends in the business, right? They've invested in Facebook, as you'll see here in a minute, and they have friends at Yahoo. They've been working with them. They have joint advertising programs and so on and so forth. So now Microsoft has to decide who do they love more of their 2 children or their 2 friends. They obviously love Facebook more because their $240 million investment is now worth $1.6 billion. So they go ahead and give them 650 of those patents for $550 million. I say give. 550 million is not exactly giving, but it's give. So what's interesting and exciting on this chart? Absolutely nothing. It's completely predictable, right? It's everything you could completely predict. Nobody's jumping up and down, except for one thing that you got a flash of, and I'll show you again. So here's the Aol Stock Chart. Think about this for a minute. So here's the day where they sold those patents, right? So this is $18. This is $26. It was 40% difference. So why did this happen? Why did this company come along, and they had these patents here too, right? So you have the market is valuing your company. And it says in your company you have the assets and the patents and the buildings and da-da-da-da-da. And if you trade some of those patents for cash, what should happen with your market capitalization? Nothing, or nothing, right? Because if you traded them correctly, right, you sold them, but you got the cash. So you no longer have the patents, but you have the cash to show for it, so nothing should have happened. So why did they pick up $700 million, right? Almost 40% of their company in value. These are real dollars, right? People who invested in your 401k is invested in AOL for sure, right? You picked up $700 million after you sold something that the market should have already priced. So what gives? What gives? What's the market recognizing? There's some value in patents, right? If they sold these for $1 billion, there must be more there. Right? These are very serious dollars. So the next question is, what's tomorrow, right? And now you should be trembling with either excitement or fear. Excitement because this is coming to biotech. Why is it coming to biotech? Because the previous set of slides I just showed you, everybody in that industry at the same conference just like this 10 years ago and 15 years ago said, it'll never come here. Patents are for airplanes and cars and things like that. It has nothing to do with anything, right? We're software guys. It has nothing to do with us. You know, the great charts we saw this morning about the metabolic bugs and drugs and so on and so forth. I'm thinking, great, all of that ought to be patented. As a matter of fact, since it's now first to file, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to the patent office. So how is this going to come to biotech? And basically, how do we make that work in our favor? So here's a chart. I'm at a firm called Tomo. There's about 100 of us consulting in and around intellectual property, basically focused on money and intellectual property. So we did this graph. It's very simple to create the S&P 500 chart to talk about the ratio of tangible value to intangible value, right? What do you actually have in your company versus what is kind of floating out there as intangible value. You can see the complete inversion there. Then you look at the IP market, of which just a small fraction is being licensed today. That's across all industries. And it's even worse in biotech. When you talk to people in biotech, they do a lot of deals, right? Biotech, life science, pharma, medical device. I come from medical device. It seems like there's a lot of deals, right? A lot of IP stuff. If you ask anybody about IP, say, oh yeah, we know about IP. We license this, we sold that. Universities license, everybody licenses. But when you look at it relative to other industry, not much actually happens relative to what's possible. So IP is now an asset in and of itself. Intellectual property, just the patents. You see it being traded, you see shareholder activists coming around. It didn't start out that way, right? It started out as litigation, right, in first generation of IP markets. And then people started cross-licensing to reduce the cost of litigation. Then they started giving royalty-based industry licenses, and Ford was the first one to start this. And then they started expansion licensing, meaning I'm going to put my stuff out of my industry, take my stuff out of my industry and give it to others. Then there was a second generation. These are now called trolls. PLEC is a patent licensing and enforcement company, and now it's called a patent troll or a non-practicing entity like that. We ran at Tomo the public auctions of patents, and if you've never seen those are really fun. It's like Sotheby's and art, right? So patents go up for sale, and there's white paddles, and there's people in suits and telephones, and it's really fun. And we did about $150 million of transactions of patents, very, very serious business, and then sold that whole business to a large British company called ICAP, who still runs it. Patent pools, people have done some with that. Web portals and listings of patents pretty much all died because they're too complicated, right? It's not, people try to make the eBay of patents, it doesn't really work. The third generation, where we are now, we see the patent aggregators. So there are companies who do nothing but patents, and they're not law firms, they're just folks who do patent licensing. And they go and acquire patents, they go raise money on Wall Street. There's a dozen of these companies, 2 or 3 of them are billion-dollar companies. Very sophisticated, smart companies. Which means, I'll give you an example. So one of my assignments now, it's public, a company called Helicos Biosciences. Anybody heard of them? Yeah. So we did some work for them, and I now have the assignment to sell either that business or its intellectual property. You know they have a lawsuit with Pacific Bio, Life, and Illumina. And there are lots of folks interested in acquiring them. We just got the bids yesterday. It's very exciting. Lots of folks bidding on different kinds of assets. And some of the folks who are bidding are, guess who? Patent aggregators. The first time we've seen that in our industry in 20 years. People who do nothing but patents are interested in buying assets from Helicos. Why? Well, you figured it out. Litigation funding is a big business. We run an IP derivative index. That's a traded index on the New York Stock Exchange of 300 best companies by their IP quality. So it's called the Tomo 300. You can go and put some of your 401k in that index because we track all of these companies. It's just a basket fund that does it. We just launched unitized license rights where we're trading in a public exchange, right? Think of a stock market. We're trading in a public exchange, unitized rights for a license to go build one thing or 100,000 things. This was just published in The Economist. By the way, who stole my Economist? I left it right here. Come on, where is it? I left my prop right here before I went on break, and somebody took it. So it's in The Economist. I was supposed to show you The Economist right now. It's just in the new one. Go buy it. And there's a nice big article about intellectual property trading and how it could work in a public market. So you could buy, if you say, look, I'm a pharma company X, I know that I can sell 1 million units or 10 million units of this, not more, because I'm unlikely to get more than 10% of the market. Let me just buy 1 million rights, individualized rights for that. The golden rule here basically means the guy with the gold makes the rules. The guy with the gold right now is Wall Street. So what our challenge is, how do we get Wall Street to pay to be the next Wallenberg, the $150 million thing? How do we get Wall Street to toss $100 billion at the problems that Larry's talking about? Well, they know one language, right? This is a good language they know, right? Clearly they're starting to speak the language of IP, so let's go do that. This is jumping ahead, I apologize. So, how do we do that? Part of what we do, I think I might have jumped another couple of, here it is. So, we look at IP strategy as the way to do that. It's not just I have 10 patents, what I do with them. It's much more complicated than that, because somebody else has 10 patents and some university has 100 patents and these guys have a license, and you already as a small, how many folks in startups? Startup companies? Yeah, great. So you already gave a license to pick big name pharma company. So you've already encumbered your assets, your IP a bit. So how do you do that? One way to do it is to really think about your portfolio architecture. What are you putting in? And it's not just patents, it's what else? Trade secrets, right? Know-how, maybe trademarks, maybe copyrights, maybe a number of other things that the collaborations, other things that you put in there. And then how do you monetize that? And what I'll talk about, the second part of the talk, is the monetization piece. Risk management is a big piece here that can work to your advantage if done right. Nothing better than scaring a large company with some of the stuff that you have in a way that doesn't scare them enough to where they don't want to do business with you. Strategy completely different. Everybody's thinking of IP now as one thing. I have a patent, and everybody kind of follows the same pathway to file a patent. You have an invention disclosure, you give it to the attorney, they file it with the patent office, you fight with the patent office, usually some 20-year-old kid who couldn't care less, and then you get your monstrous patent, and then you go sue somebody for $1 billion. So the strategy has to be very different for all of these different kinds of companies, and obviously for all of these. Right now, it's all conflated. It's all IP. People just talk about IP. What we've seen, however, the original IP came, mining machinery and airplanes and some chemistry and automotive and semiconductors and computers and software, social networks, and all of that. So we've now seen this trend 10 times. We know exactly what happens and how it works. And now is the time to get smart about it in biotech, and people really aren't. You'd be surprised when I talk to any level manager at any large company about IP, they all give me the same spiel. We're very good at IP, we have a good strategy, and we license a lot of stuff in and out. And that's really not what we're talking about here, and that's not what Wall Street is talking about here. So there's some question about, are you worried about your IP assets themselves or about the equity of the company? And the question is, are you just doing risk management? And this is really where everybody is right now, risk management. Just make sure that I don't get sued, or you don't sue me, I don't sue you, and make sure their trade secrets don't leak, and that's basically it. So people mostly sit here. At some level, we're seeing folks on the risk management side start to be worried about shareholder activists that I talked about, right? Wall Street folks who know about patents, who buy up small parts of a company and then work to change the management and throw them out. The next piece is some incremental enhancements and say, okay, let's add 5 more patents, let's do 3 more licenses. The interesting piece is transformational change. What can we do such that if we're really good at making IP, why are we doing other stuff? Perhaps we should just make IP and stay with that and enable a bunch of other folks to do other things. Some guiding principles, and I'm sure these slides will be online and you can take a look. But these are some of the guiding principles that your firm should agree on. What do we do with our IP? How much do we publish? How much do we give away? What do we keep? What do we license? Do we have partners? Do we keep everything for ourselves? Do we put everything on the web? Where are we on these principles? Sorry, this keeps jumping ahead. So what's happening in biotech? I use biotech, life science, medical device, the whole thing. It's bad news from everywhere. Right? Funding is drying up. FDA is incredibly difficult. Another, in my case, bunch of 25-year-old, brand new, freshly minted government bureaucrats at the FDA. I don't even know where these kids learn to be so evil. How can you be a jaded government bureaucrat at 25? I just don't get it. This is not an official opinion of Ocean Tomo. Just me. We love the FDA. The payers are obviously just pushing prices down. Just cost. You can't get a medical device out unless you can show cost improvement. The patient care, the last thing you want to do is go to anywhere and say some kind of quality of life improvement, right? Quality of care, or some kind of patient comfort, God forbid. Patient comfort, it's a joke, right? Who cares, right? So you're suffering in the ICU needlessly, and for $50, you don't have to be suffering. Just keep suffering, because we have other priorities. That's kind of sick and inhuman, and it's not even narcissistic. I don't even know what it is. It's just evil. And the investors, anybody who knows in startups and even in public markets, the capital is tighter. There's not enough cash, and all of this is really pressing down. So I invented a really smart biotech company name for pick some really smart biotech company. What are they going to do? So we're going to go through a couple of case studies. So here's a really smart biotech co. Inc. And they have some development opportunities. They can do some diagnostics. They developed some platform technology on some omics. They could do clinical diagnostics. Of course, they can do therapeutics, because if you do diagnostics, you can do therapeutics. They can do targeted R&D focused on screening kinds of things, for example. Or they could do broad-based licensing program, including focusing on R&D. So one of the things they could do is really focus on the expansion of the scope and think about how to get their technology out to everybody, to become a standard in the industry. Do you know any examples of folks who've done that? Early stage, developing things, and became a standard? I have some examples, and it came through an application of a licensing approach. I'll show you in a minute. Focusing on the IP facilitates development of partnerships. What does that mean? Well, that's that risk management. You want to be a pain in the neck of some large company so that their risk management guy says, we really want to fleece this little company out of everything they got, want to steal their stuff and want to put them out of business, but we can't because they have strong IP, and it's up to you to do that. And having 2 patents isn't really an IP strategy. Having a lot of these partnerships helps follow on innovation and new applications of things you could never think about. So think about who all could you partner with. Everybody thinks of, if you're a startup, who are you partnering with? Pharma, you go up, right? But is there somebody you can partner with laterally, other startups? And that's part of the new model that we'll discuss. Is there somebody you can partner with in a different direction? Are there foundations? Are there universities? Are there individual researchers? Who else could you partner with in the ecosystem? And the reason people don't do it now is what? They'll take my stuff, right? How do I get their stuff? They'll take my stuff. I don't know how to do the accounting. What's missing is the accounting system, right? Larry talked about defense and energy. Part of what they worked out is an accounting system, right? There's such a thing called a federal claims court, if you're the federal government and you give to your contractors a request for proposals to build guided missiles, and they go build it. And in the process of building it, they've infringed the patents of some company. That little company can sue the government and get its money and say, hey, wait a minute, government, you took my patents, right? And I'm going to take you to federal claims court, and I'm going to get my money. Lots of accounting systems are worked out on how to deal with apportioning innovation. We don't really have that in biotech just yet. So what's the smart thing for the biotech company to do is protect the key elements of the value chain, because you can't protect everything. So it might be some reagent, right? It might be some chip. It might be whatever. Part of the problem in licensing is that it's all bilateral deals. Anybody in licensing here? Yes? A couple of folks. Yep. Hi there. Really smart folks on one side and really smart folks on the other side, and they try to get in the room and hammer it out over several months. Then they each pass it to their lawyers. That takes another few months. And then you come up with some deal it's basically spaghetti of terms and notes and all kinds of really complicated things. And as soon as you're finished, you move to the next one and do the same thing again. So the idea is to come up with some packages. How could this work? And to name since it's really smart company, name it some smart compound and push that out as a standard. So standardize, simplify, just like the telecom industry, right? Your phones work together because they got in the room and they hate each other just as much as everybody else hates each other. You saw my big pathological slide on litigation. All of those same guys that are suing each other are also the main suppliers to each other, right? Samsung buys their screens from Apple, and they all sit on the same standards committees, making the same antennas and same protocols and same everything else. None of that exists in biotech. None. So somewhere to learn, it's been done, and we just need to figure out how to do it. And somebody talked about standards earlier. Professor Ullman, is it, that talked about standards on proteomics, right, the human atlas. Let's get some standards. So why would the really smart code do this? Because it can focus on the technology development. Because by design, they really shouldn't be wasting time on IP. How many of you who are in really good scientists, engineers, whatever, are wasting 80% of your time on stuff that's not really good science and engineering? Right? So why don't we let you do that and let us do that and then let other folks deal with what they're really good at? So the idea is to focus on platform rather than specific applications, because what's the first thing? You invent some platform technology, say, oh my God, this is going to change the world, like we heard from Imperial College. Right? This is really cool stuff. It's going to absolutely change the world. It's a completely different way to look at things. So what's the first thing, if you were a company and you invented that, what's the first thing your inventors would tell you? Pick one thing and do it really well. And guess what? That's exactly what you do. You pick one thing, you do it really well, and then what happens? Same thing that happened to my first company. Picked one thing, did it really well. It got bought by a Fortune 500. They bought the team. They bought everything else. They disassembled everything, and everything basically went to hell. Right? They're still making money selling the product, but the whole platform technology idea, it's over. It's dead. So why do that? The other piece is to enable additional research by third parties. And this is the piece of licensing that I really want to focus on that has to do with how do we do it in early stage. It's very easy to do this when it's all finished. Right? When it's all done, then you just say, all right, it's all done. You toss it over the wall, and there's a really big group of smart licensing people, and they figure out how to parse all this stuff out. The trick is, how do you do it while you're still developing it, while you're still working on some things? So one model would be for the really smart biotech code to stick to its guns and do the core technology, and create a licensing entity that then has some partners on the equipment and partners on manufacturing, and then it has a bunch of different kinds of licensees down here. Who are these licensees? So we said one is what? The vertical pharma, right? Who could this be? Other startups. Who could this be? Universities, right? They might be doing other stuff. Who could this be? Not-for-profits. Who could this be? Some other equipment company that wants to get into the business. However, this accounting system has to work. It just doesn't exist today. I'm puzzled. I took an accounting class in college. I studied engineering. And I took an accounting class and a finance class. And I discovered two things. One, I'm a genius. Right? Because after going through differential equations and all kinds of crazy stuff in engineering, you go over there and nobody knows math, and all of a sudden you're a genius. Right? The second thing I figured out is they have girls. That was a good position to be in. So some problems here. It's non-trivial to do this, right? What's the problem? Well, you got to have some kind of segments. So normally when big pharma comes in, what's the first thing they want to do? They want to take everything, right? Here's $1 million and your life's work and $150 million that you invested, give us everything. And if we make some money, we'll sprinkle a few pennies on you, and good luck and farewell. Otherwise, we know you're going to go bankrupt because the FDA is on your case, as are the investors, as are the payers. So, Mr. Biotech scientist, suck it up. Here's $1 million, have a good life. So how do you separate this out? Well, you separate it out by creating different licensing packages, which we'll talk about in just a bit. Each licensee type has different needs. So what? Right? I have 4 kids. They all have different needs, but right? I'm the one provider of stuff to them, so I figure out how to deliver some things in a systematic manner and others with some customization. So they just have to deal with that. And there has to be some customization of rights such that they're not encroaching on each other's products. That's non-trivial. Sorry, this keeps jumping forward. Everybody wants exclusivity for their proprietary products. Everybody wants a strategy. We want to make a strategy to make everything widely available. And there are some examples of people who have done exactly this. What we want to do as the really smart co, we want to maintain exclusivity of our reagents. We want to figure out where in the value chain, get some of those people from business school to tell you what the value chain is, and then where in the value chain is your opportunity to make the most money. Who knows about Weinstein Film Company? The theater guys. So they're the ones who make most money from all the movies, right? You think it's Sony or Fox or whoever, or the actors, and you hear Julia Roberts got 20 million, this guy got 100 million. No, the Weinsteins make all of the money from all of the movies because they control the distribution. They sat down and figured out, wait a minute, somehow these movies got to get out. If you try to release a movie without the Weinsteins, you just die. Right? Just nothing happens. And you need to be the Weinstein. Here's some industry examples, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. You might have seen some of these before. So first one is Qualcomm, is a telecom company. It's in your phone. If you have a phone, you have a Qualcomm chip in your phone, right? Who knows Qualcomm? Yeah, just a bunch of scientists, and actually mathematicians, electrical engineers. They created a particular way, particular technology called CDMA, and then decided, you know what? We're not going to go build equipment. We're just going to go stick with our science, and then we'll just create licensing packages for everybody else. We may make some chips, but we're not going to build phones. Everybody else who decided not to do that, AT&T, right? Their whole thing went bankrupt, Lucent, and sold to Alcatel, effectively almost bankrupt. Nortel went bankrupt, sold its patents. Everybody else who was in that business except them went bankrupt, and they're the only ones who are making money. A small chunk of change in royalties on chips. Every time you make a phone call, you probably paid a penny to Qualcomm. The accounting system is working, right? They figured out how to do proper accounting. So here's basically what they do. They just do R&D. They have new ideas, they file intellectual property rights, they sell licenses and chips to manufacturers. These guys do all the heavy lifting and send cash and additional ideas up this way. It's a pretty sweet deal. Why aren't we doing that? Here's another licensing study, Dolby, right? The speakers in your car, the speakers, in the movies, everywhere else. A guy named Ray Dolby, one guy started this. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He basically became the industry standard. Everybody else gets 10 companies who hate each other with strong political connections in a room and try to figure out how to hammer out some agreement while they hate each other. He said, you know what? I'm just going to be the standard. Pretty cool. So he created basically Dolby noise reduction technology, which is, if you're an engineer, it's good. It's not that much better than everything else. Lots of other stuff that's just as good. But he formed a licensing strategy and made it very simple. He took the high-end commercial market and does that himself and created licenses everything else to the consumer market. So everywhere else you see Dolby on every DVD, on every Blu-ray, on every movie, whatever it is, it comes from licensing. As a matter of fact, 75% of revenue comes from licensing. There's some specific details here, how they have to focus on equipment manufacturers to create some barriers in patent litigation. This is the key thing. They set very low rates. Right? One of the problems with smart people is they think their stuff is really highly valuable. Right? Here's my invention. It's worth $1 billion. And every company in the world is infringing it. As a matter of fact, it's worth $10 billion. It's really not. Right? It's worth 10 cents a chip. However, you got to find 20 million people to buy a chip, or 100 million, or 2 billion people to buy a chip. So the royalty here, for example, is royalty per channel. As a matter of fact, they did so much licensing, they created a company called Via Licensing. They became so good at licensing that now other people go to Dolby and say, can you help me license my stuff out? This is old stuff, right? This is 10, 15, 20-year-old stuff. Here's Resound, hearing aid company, started in '96. Bunch of Danish companies, started with VC funding, created some patent pools, big fight with 3M, and then created basically a club. Takes $2 million to join the club. When you join the club, you get access to all of the patents, and you have to give some new improvements out, and that's it. Now it's run by a Danish company called GN Resound, or GN. Here's Cetus. You guys know probably more about this than I do. And Roche, and the whole PCR technology becoming a standard. They were big, so it was a little easier to do that. It's harder to do when you're small. But the whole idea is, here's the royalties. The whole idea is to standardize. Right? So can you push your own standard? biotech licensing, more on genetic testing, therapeutic screening, and PCR automation technologies, all part of the license which could be applied to us. Fun and interesting things. Life science has a number of new open source models, so it's not all about patenting, it's about the ecosystem. So there are 5 different models here, and I'll flip through them very quickly with examples of companies. So here's Transparency Life Sciences that is hoping to reduce the trial costs, an interesting one to incorporate in your package. Here's a contest model that gives money for best ideas, right? And lets scientists compete, something you could implement in your own firm. Here's Open Innovation Discovery with Lilly, where Lilly basically maintains some rights, very loose. It's a very loose, low-cost kind of a package. The whole idea is to spread things out to a larger number of targets. And here's the charity model for cancer research, for example, that's generating some serious dollars going forward. Here's Pass the Hat model with BG Medicine, a different way, hard for a startup to do, but a different way to get research funded. So the really smart co, in addition to everything else that it's doing, really needs to consider the open source options. But remember, it's a two-way arrow here. You got to give something in this plan. So what could the firm do? Either work with few large strategic partners, which is the traditional model, but if you need to secure 10 more deals of those agreements, it would take you 10 more years, because it took you the year to get the first one done. So alternatively, you have expand dramatically the addressable market by making packages and have an open framework and create a broad licensing program here. And I'll show you what that chart looks like. So how do you do it early stage? That's the trick. How do you do it when you're not there? It's easy to do when you have everything done. How do you do it when it's not done? There's a big chart. In Europe, we call these the German charts because they have so many words, so many things per slide. But here's the idea. So here's your startup, and it has some assets here. Right? It has some IP, it has some clinical data, it has some core clinical data that just kind of says, okay, proteomics works. But then it has some targeted data on, certain things, but not others. Then it has some basic algorithms, and then there's a bunch of other things here, and there's some equipment and some people. And we just call this high, medium, low here. And then we looked at diagnostic categories, targets, and treatment, if you will, or categories and targets, and then other targets. So here are some targets that you could have, and there can be a few larger ones and a whole bunch of others, but let's say there's 100. No way you're going to do 100 deals. So how do you get a deal to happen here? Well, you get a deal to happen by being reasonable about pricing. First of all, you say, all right, so for liver, we have great IP, we're okay on clinical data, we have some really good specific clinical data that we acquired, we have some algorithms that you can adapt, and we have some equipment and people. By the way, for us to get here, it took $150 million, right, as a startup. So you're starting from $150 million, and this one liver column is worth, today we think maybe $2 million or $5 million. What you're going to need to do once you acquire it, the rights to it, you need to put in another 10 to make it work, and that looks like our license package A. So you create standard licensing packages, right? So for lung treatment, IP is great, clinical data is great, target clinical data is great, algorithms are great, everything is great. You know what? You're going to pay a little more because we've invested an okay amount, you're going to need a little more to invest, so therefore license package C is for you. Why would you do this? Why would somebody do this as a buyer? Right? Why not create the Facebook model here? Larry's already indicated his love for Facebook and its great social worth and core contribution to value of humanity. But part of how they made money is doing exactly this. They made the platform available to others. So there's a company called Zynga. Anybody know Zynga? It's an awesome thing. I absolutely hate the everything they do, but when I see on my credit card a $10 thing from one of my kids who bought strawberries on Zynga, so they have Smurfs, they have all these games, and you buy what look like real things, but you buy virtual things. So my kid goes and spends $1 on a batch of strawberries they're going to plant in a Smurf garden. It's a $10 billion company. Right? People pay money for another piece of software, and some strawberries show up on the screen, and there goes $1, and $1, and $1, and $1, and there it is. And Facebook, of course, makes money from every dollar that's made there, and Zynga makes money from every dollar that's made there. How did they do it? They did it by they spent more time, money, and energy on focusing on how to work with partners. And that's exactly it doesn't exist in the biotech world. So the idea is, who would do this then? Well, who would do this is a new startup. So think of a 25-year-old kid who just graduated with a PhD from X, wants to go and start a hot new biotech thing. They need $50 million to get started. They're not going to get $50 million. However, they could come to one really smart biotech co and license package B. And then go to their investors and say, look, $150 million has been invested already. I picked one target that I know is really good. I have a reasonable estimate it'll take me $5 million to get there, and I think I can get there in 3 years. That's a totally different concept than, hi, I'm a biotech student, I just finished, and I need $50 million to get to phase 1. Other startups could do this, right? Startups who are already there, sign up, large pharma, foundations, they could say, great, we have an idea. We're going to pick from really smart company, whoever it is. We're going to pick everything that has to do with Alzheimer's, and then we're going to go enable this other Alzheimer's startup that's struggling, and we'll just give them the $5 million and this license, and off they go to create that. This model doesn't exist. So how would you do it? Well, the really smart co really needs to map out the development paths, determine what's the end. If your end is 1, if you have one compound to treat one disease, this doesn't work. If you have a platform technology, this works really well. What are the limitations of your existing agreements, which you probably have some to survive? How can you leverage them? And how does this fit in your current business plan? And you hire some IP consultant to go do all of this stuff here and not worry about it. There's lots of folks who can do it. So that's basically it. A model to put all of this together in a way that takes early stage research, if it's passed enough milestones, and spread it out to a very large number of people in a way that's a standard, like CDMA for Qualcomm. And just stick with inventing new stuff. Make the package such that it's easy for the buyer to come in and get the set of rights that they need. And then what you get to do is you get this to become the standard of your biotech company, and you get to sit in the middle of the value chain and have a tax every time somebody goes through the gate. That's all I have for today. Questions?